Alright, greetings everybody. Welcome to the first lecture for U.S. History 1, 1301. The first lecture is titled The Age of European Expansion and Conquest. And so the overall essay question that you'll be responding to is discuss the age of European expansion and conquest and its various stages of development. In your discussion, give examples of each phase of its development and show the motivating forces that finally induced England to colonize. Alright, so for this segment we'll be looking at Learning Objective 1. And keep in mind that collectively all of the learning objectives for this lecture and all of the lectures make up the outline for the essay, including the last learning objective, which is usually the reading assignment for the essay. And it's always a good idea, when it's relevant and pertinent, to thread in aspects of the reading assignment, again, when it's relevant and pertinent to the particular learning objective, if you're able to do so. Not just the last learning objective where the reading assignment is required. So for this learning objective, we're defining the age of expansion and conquest, and explain how, why, and when it developed. So the thing we want to keep in mind is this period is a term used to describe the geographical, political, and commercial expansion which took place between the 1450s and the 1650s, generally speaking, as the nations of Europe searched for new trade routes to what they considered the Orient, just basically the Middle East and China and Southeast Asia, which led to the discovery of new lands, unintended discovery of new lands and trade routes. So in order to understand how the Age of Discovery developed, it's important to understand the internal development growth process. Two factors brought about this process. The first was the Crusades, and the second was the Black Death. So the results of the Crusades were far-reaching as European soldiers brought back dramatic stories and examples of wealth of the East in the forms of perfumes, silks, spices, drugs, and fruits, which stimulated demand for developing trade between the two areas. So this was amazing for these young men, basically, to go down there who lived in basically probably a very mundane existence, living in Europe for most of their lives, to go into these incredibly urban, sophisticated areas and to become and have contact with that. Right. So much of the trade, as well as the Crusaders themselves, were transported by Italian seamen from the Italian city-states. So this area right here. So the Crusades and the emerging trade that was developed between this part of the world and this part of the world had to go through these channels here to get across. These are basically the keepers of the highway of the Mediterranean Sea. The Italian city-states and their merchants recognized the importance of the demand for Italian ships. This demand was created by the need to carry Crusaders, their supplies, and the new-found trade between Europe and the Holy Land. Consequently, the Italian city-states quickly developed a monopoly in this area. So hence, the significance of the Crusades was that they helped stimulate the transformation of Western Europe from economic stagnation of feudalism to the dynamic expansion of modern capitalism, the new system that it would create. And this is a real important thing to keep in mind. So this new trade that was developed created this new, slowly, let me emphasize slowly, over hundreds of years, from the early 11th century up until the late 15th or early 15th century. This new group of people considered the bourgeoisie, basically independent and self assured group whose interests were more commercial and more rational than the declining noble lords. And so their interests evolve around commerce, right? And this is important to understand because it initiates a revolution that we're very, very familiar with that culminates in the year 1776. I'll let you stew on that and see if you can guess what revolution I'm talking about. And what that revolution entails is challenging irrational forms to claim to power. Now, I'm not using rational and irrational as complimentary or derogatory, insulting words. It's just a way of describing the dynamics of power. So an irrational form of power is power that's mostly based on custom, ritual, history, where people where people are willingly submitting to power just because this is how it's been done for years. In a capitalist system, which is basically this right here, I want all of this, what you have up here, so I'm giving you this bag of gold or some of this gold for what you got, right? Basically, capitalism is an economic system that uses the abstraction of money from individuals rather than some sort of monarch or state government power or not, right? So individuals have control over capital and they can buy and sell as they wish as long as they have access to that capital. Their power is going to become more rational than the noble lords and the Catholic Church and the princes and the fiefdoms and the kings and the queens. Because they can get people to do what they want, because if they have enough bags of money, people are going to listen to them and will protect them and do service for them rather than do service for the noble lords and the Catholic Church or whatever the case may be, because there's more money in it for people, which opens up all sorts of opportunities and whatnot. And so this picture right here, it's a great picture because it shows, this is a piece by Diego Rivera, which really looks at the dynamic of capitalism and the problems with it, right? You've got slavery, the decimation of the environment, new animals being brought in, unbelievable brutality being inflicted on people, the threat and the credible threat of violence, as you see up here, in order to make sure that this process goes as smoothly as possible. So, again, this is an important point to understand because, again, what happens is that this group of people, this bourgeoisie, these Western businessmen that are slowly developing trade relations with the Far East, are able to erode on a very gradual level the power of the Catholic Church, the power of the noble lords, till finally it culminates through a lot of machinations and twists and turns into the American Revolution. If you think about what the American Revolution of 1776 was a group of businessmen that proclaimed to the world that forevermore will we not adhere to the idea of the divine right to power, right? A king. There's no rational basis to believe that anyone has the authority granted to them through the power of God, right? The only way one can have power is through the consent of the people. And this is what the so-called Founding Fathers would claim for themselves. They were speaking for the people of Great Britain's empire in the Americas, and they were going to create a government that would perpetuate this notion of democratic republics. So, very interesting. So the American Revolution just doesn't come out of nothing. It comes out of a very long process that begins going all the way back to the Crusades and the declining of the Catholic Church and the noble lords. All right, to continue. You also have the Black Death from 1347 to 1350. This was another major factor which helped bring about a transformation of Europe during the Middle Ages. The population reduction cannot be accurately estimated, but figures range from 20 to up to 50%, right? So that's pretty high. But considering, this is devastating to a society, but consider what happened to Native Americans from 3 generations from first contact. It's estimated that not just 20 to 50% of the population was wiped out by disease that they contracted from the European invaders, but up to 90% of the population. 90% is what historians and anthropologists now estimate. Unbelievable devastation. So we're dealing with a pretty significant population drop in such a short amount of time, 20 to 50% here. Death tolls of this magnitude threw the European social order into, well, chaos. Feudal noble lords lost their peasants, and peasants lost their lords. Security of the peasants was jeopardized by the death of nobles, and the death often served as an invitation for expansion by aggressive neighbor. So this threw off the whole deal, right? The whole deal in the manorial feudal system was if you're the lord, then you have these serfs, and they provide for you by using the land that's held in common to grow you food stuff and to make things that you need and all this kind of stuff. And in return, you will adequately and sufficiently protect them. Right? Well, the Black Death throws that all into upheaval, that arrangement. So the disaster hastened great economic change. Agricultural production was disrupted as fields were left untilled and crops unharvested, and peasants suddenly found their labor in short supply. The peasants demanded and received land leases for longer terms and lower payments. So thus, the Black Death weakened significantly the bonds of feudalism, but society was energized by a new set of conditions and opportunities. Hence, the Crusades and the Black Death helped bring about, 1, the decline of the manorial economy, the feudal social structure. The decline in these areas helped bring about the development of commerce, use of money, which in turn accelerated the growth of towns. This resulted in the increased use of money from trade between various towns and parts of Western Europe, and led to the development of the bourgeois or business and merchant class. All of these interrelated activities led to the breakdown of the self-sufficiency of the manor, the feudal system, which had rested on the use of products available within its confines. So that concludes learning objective 1. So again, basically the structure of learning objective 1 is to understand. So the why, we've discussed the how, now we're looking at the why. The why behind the age of expansion and conquest occurred once the kings were able to consolidate their power under their new national states. So what you begin to see here is the emergence of new nation states right here. They realized that finding a direct route to the Orient would wipe out the whole succession of charges levied on goods from the far east to Europe, and would break the Italian monopoly on the Mediterranean. So again, the dynamic behind this is this whole Western Europe for the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, was for most of its history controlled by various little fiefdoms, little princes that controlled the area's territory, much like how gangs are organized. And so you had all these various gang members controlling territory, and that's always bad for business. And when there's lots of money to be made, and there was lots of money down here to be made, it makes sense to begin to consolidate power. So there's not so many of these people taking a cut from the bourgeoisie, the businessmen. And so what begins to happen is the stronger princes begin to get in line the other princes and be able to make huge claims of power to being kings and queens, and they're able to get these people in line and so and promise and make guarantees to the business community, the emerging business community of this time, that business will be good from now on because things will be under control. And the first thing they wanted to do was to consolidate power, not only just to cut out the vying factions of power here, but to also cut out the middlemen in the Italian city-states here who control the Mediterranean. How about if we go down here, right? Maybe if we form an expedition to go down here past Africa, we could figure out a different way. Or maybe if we transverse land like Marco Polo did over here, maybe we could find different trade routes this way. And this takes money. This takes time. It takes money. And so consolidation of power was an absolute necessity. And eventually what will happen is, well, maybe if we go west and see what's out there, this is what Christopher Columbus would eventually do. So that's the why. Why were Europeans able to expand and finally conquer most of the world? Well, why? It's because they were able to consolidate power in the interest of developing further trade and expanding on the trade that existed to get around these folks right here and the vying princes throughout Europe. So out of this, over time, through the 1400s, you have these nation-states starting to develop: Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, eventually England, and the when. So we've discussed the how, we've discussed the when, or the why. The when now came about with the ability of the kings, the monarchs, to consolidate their power under the new national state and their subsequent participation in the age of expansion and conquest. It occurred at different times for each nation state. The participation occurred for each nation when their internal development process, which came about in large part, but not solely, but in large part from the Crusades and the Black Death, which caused the decline of the feudal system and the rise of the bourgeoisie class, caused by the new social, economic, and political forces that developed during the Middle Ages, was completed, moving on to the Renaissance and this into the age of imperialism. Right. So that concludes Learning Objective 1, looking at the how, why, and when of why Europe, of all places in the world, became the most powerful region on the planet, taking over most of it commercially and politically. I'll see you in Learning Objective